After 8 months of desperate searching, Alexandra finally found her 2 missing daughters, thanks to a pilot who spotted them on a supposedly uninhabited island. She wanted nothing more than justice for what these wealthy predators had done to her children, but she soon discovered that holding them accountable would be far from simple. Soon, she would uncover the horrible truth of what was truly going on at that island, what these sick people were doing with the children, and the disturbing extent to which their operation had unfolded. While fighting for justice, she would find that not everyone plays by the same rules, and that the legal battle against these powerful individuals would be far from easy, throwing her family into great danger once again. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Alexandra sat on the sofa in the living room of the small apartment in Broome, Western Australia, her hands resting protectively on her daughter's shoulders. Casey and Chloe nestled against her, their small bodies warm and solid beneath her touch, a physical reminder that the nightmare of the past 8 months was finally over. Across from them sat Maisie Colton, a social worker with kind eyes and a gentle voice who had been assigned to their case. The apartment, arranged by Ben and guarded by police officers stationed outside, had been their sanctuary for the past 3 days since the dramatic rescue on Jologo Beach. "You're safe now," Maisie assured the girls with a warm smile. "The police and your mother are working very hard to make sure those bad men never come back and won't do bad things to any children again." Alexandra felt Casey shift slightly against her side. The psychological impact of their ordeal was still evident in the way the girls grew silent when strangers approached. 8 months of separation and manipulation had left its mark. "I want you to know," Maisie continued, her voice gentle but clear, "that you can tell me anything about what happened while you were away from your mother, but only if you want to. You don't have to say anything if you're not ready." A heavy silence fell over the room. Alexandra could feel Chloe tense beside her, the little girl's fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, a nervous habit she'd developed since their reunion. Casey, always the more talkative of the two, glanced at her sister before taking a deep breath. "There were other children in the house," Casey said finally, her voice small but determined. "Where the bad men kept us. We used to play together." Alexandra felt her heart constrict. Other children. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. Casey continued, gaining momentum as she spoke. "Sometimes the men would come and pick some of us to go to the bedroom with them." She paused, looking up at her mother with anxious eyes as if worried about her reaction. Alexandra maintained her composure despite the horror rising within her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell us anything." "They didn't hurt us," Casey clarified quickly. "They never talked bad to us, but sometimes they made us do strange things like taking pictures together." Chloe nodded in agreement, finally finding her voice. "They took pictures of our hands and legs, and they made us change clothes lots of times while they took more pictures." "They tried to make it fun," Casey added, her face scrunching as she recalled the memory. "They laughed and smiled, but if anyone said no, they wouldn't give us enough food at the next meal." Alexandra closed her eyes briefly, trying to process what she was hearing. When she opened them, she found Maisie watching her with a look of professional concern. Alexandra rubbed her temple, shaking her head in disbelief at what her daughters had endured. "Thank you both for being so brave and telling us this," Maisie said to the girls. "It helps us understand what happened, and it might help other children too." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember what the house looked like or where it was? Was there anything special about it that you noticed?" Casey's brow furrowed in concentration. "It was big and beautiful inside, lots of big windows, and there was a pool. There was a tree shaped like an elephant at the entrance," Chloe added excitedly, seemingly pleased to contribute something important. Casey nodded vigorously. "Yes, and they took us to a pastry shop that had lots of books." "Once a week," Chloe chimed in, "by car to reward the best-behaving kid." Maisie nodded, jotting notes in her small notebook. "That's very helpful. Did you ever see other people at the house, besides the men who took you and the other children?" Casey nodded again. Sometimes people came and took some of our friends. The men said our friends were going on holiday and would return to their parents because they were obedient and good kids. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said if we were good, we would go on holiday too. But we missed Mommy, Chloe said quietly, her hand finding Alexandra's. Did you tell the men that you missed your mother? Maisie asked gently. Casey nodded. They said that on the holiday we would meet Mom if we behaved. Sometimes they said Mom told them to keep us in the house so we could learn to be good. Then we could go back to Mommy on the holiday trip. Alexandra couldn't hold back anymore. You know that's not true, right? She said, her voice breaking slightly. I would never send you away like that. Never. The girls nodded solemnly just as the doorbell rang. Are we done now? Chloe asked, clearly tired from the emotional conversation. Maisie and Alexandra exchanged understanding looks. Yes, you've been very brave today, Maisie assured them. No more questions for now. Alexandra stood and walked to the door, glancing at the clock on the wall. 2 detectives had arranged to come today to update her on the case. It was a kindness they were coming to her apartment rather than making her bring the girls to the police station again. She opened the door to find 2 plainclothes detectives waiting in the hallway. Please come in, she said, stepping aside. As the detectives settled into the living room, Maisie guided the girls to a small table in the corner, providing them with coloring books and crayons to keep them occupied during the adult conversation. Mrs. Hamilton, one of the detectives began, we've made progress in the investigation. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. The island was originally owned by a wealthy family, the Corries. After an internal conflict about 10 years ago, only the eldest son, Darren Corrie, inherited it. The second detective continued. The 2 men we apprehended are Mike Stanton and Billy Connor, close associates of Darren Corrie. We believe they're accomplices in Corrie's child trafficking operation. Alexandra leaned forward. So in order to stop this completely, you need to catch Darren Corrie. What's the progress on that? The detectives exchanged glances. That's the complication. Corrie seems to have been tipped off by our raid. He's no longer at his known residence. Documents indicate he's fled to Sweden, which makes the case more complex. When we searched Corrie's residence, the first detective added, we found little direct evidence of trafficking. However, we did discover this. He slid a photograph across the table. Alexandra picked it up, seeing a wooden box filled with brass necklaces, each bearing a small nameplate. They're souvenirs, the detective explained grimly. Each one has a child's name carved into it. The bodyguards that we secured confirmed these were the names of the children who passed through their hands. Alexandra felt sick. What about Stanton and Connor? Are they talking? They've lawyered up, the second detective said. Refusing to cooperate, their attorneys arrived within hours of the arrest. Alexandra's jaw set in determination. I'll contact my own lawyer today. I'm pressing charges against everyone involved, no matter the cost. I'll use every penny of my savings if necessary. Just because they're rich doesn't mean they can do this to children. The detectives exchanged another look before the first one leaned in, lowering his voice. Mrs. Hamilton, off the record, we've heard that Corrie has other accomplices who are already collecting money for bail, people with considerable resources. What are you saying? Alexandra asked, her voice tight. Personally, the detective continued, we'd advise against spending your savings fighting this battle. These people are powerful and dangerous. With their money and connections, they often manage to buy their freedom. The charges have been filed, the second detective added hastily, but we've seen men like this wriggle out of justice before. Alexandra stared at them in disbelief. Are you suggesting I just stay silent and go back to a normal life as if nothing happened? My daughters were missing for 8 months. They were harassed and traumatized. We understand your frustration, the detective began. No, you don't, Alexandra cut him off. I remember what you told me at the station the night we rescued my daughters. You said the evidence was enough to put these men behind bars. And we still believe that, the detective assured her, looking uncomfortable. We just want you to be prepared for a difficult fight. These people don't go down easily. Alexandra straightened her spine. Then they better prepare for the fight of their lives, because I won't stop until every single one of them is behind bars where they can't hurt any more children. After more discussion, it became clear to the detectives that Alexandra wouldn't be dissuaded. As they prepared to leave, they informed her that arrangements had been made for her and the girls to return to their home in Queensland within a few days. "Ben has organized it," one of the detectives explained. "It will be safer for you and your daughters there, and healthier for the girls to return to familiar surroundings." Alexandra nodded, feeling a wave of relief at the mention of home. "Thank you. I'll speak with Ben directly about the details." As Maisie, the social worker, made her way to the door with the detectives, she paused briefly, offering Alexandra a gentle smile. "Before we left, the girls were coloring, but partway through they started rubbing their eyes and yawning. They told me they were sleepy, so I suggested they go rest in their room. They didn't protest, just held hands and went straight to bed." Her voice was warm, reassuring. "They're safe, Alexandra, and this is the most important thing." As the detectives and social worker left the apartment, Alexandra locked the door behind them and leaned against it, momentarily closing her eyes. The battle ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. For her daughters and for all the other children still in danger, she would do whatever it took. Alexandra stepped back into the living room, her eyes immediately landing on the coloring book and scattered crayons left unattended on the floor. Moving toward the spot, she carefully gathered the items and tidied up the area. Once she had finished, she made her way to the bedroom doorway, pausing to take in the sight before her. Casey and Chloe had curled up together on the same bed, their golden heads nestled against the same pillow, their hands loosely entwined as though even in sleep. They feared being separated. The weight of the morning's interview had drained them emotionally, leaving them utterly spent. Alexandra felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that, at least for now, they had found solace in rest. She returned to her room and picked up her phone from the bed. A text message from her lawyer, who was also her friend from Queensland, Melissa Trenton, had arrived. "Arriving in Broome in an hour. Need your apartment address." Alexandra dialed her lawyer's number, feeling a surge of gratitude when her old friend answered immediately. "Melissa, I'd rather not meet at the apartment," Alexandra explained. "I've been cooped up here for 3 days with police and social workers coming and going. I need some air. There's a cafe just 5 minutes away. Maybe we could meet there." Melissa readily agreed, and Alexandra ended the call, scrolling through her other messages. There was an encouraging update from Ben confirming they could return to Queensland within 5 days, and another message from Roger, the pilot who had first spotted her daughters on the island. "Coming by at 10 a.m. with supplies and food," his message read. Alexandra quickly typed a reply. "Thank you, but you really don't need to do this every day." She had just hit send when the doorbell rang. Glancing through the peephole, she saw Roget standing in the hallway with 2 grocery bags. She opened the door, a smile softening her tired features. "Roget, I'm so sorry, I just saw your message," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "You know you really don't have to do this every day." Roget entered and headed directly to the kitchen, setting the bags on the counter. "It's no trouble at all, really," he assured her. "Being an ex-military pilot can be a pretty solitary existence. This small town doesn't offer much variety in day-to-day life." Alexandra leaned against the doorframe, watching as he unloaded fresh fruit, bread, and other essentials. "I still appreciate it. Your kindness has meant a lot, especially after everything that's happened." "Where are the girls?" Roget asked, glancing around the apartment. "Napping. The social worker's interview this morning took a lot out of them." Alexandra sighed, running a hand through her hair. "They fell asleep immediately, and it's not even noon yet." Roget nodded in understanding. "So, what's your plan for today?" "My lawyer is coming to town in an hour. I'm going to meet her at the cafe next door. I need to get out of this apartment, even if it's just for a little while." "I could watch the girls if you'd like," Roget offered. "Give you some time to talk freely with your lawyer." Alexandra hesitated, feeling the automatic protective instinct that had only grown stronger since the girl's return. "That's kind, but after everything that's happened—" "I understand," Roget said quickly. "How about this? There's a small arcade next to the cafe. I could take the girls there while you talk with your lawyer. You'd be just next door." Alexandra considered the suggestion. She'd need to discuss legal strategies without the girls hearing potentially upsetting details, and they had seemed to trust Roget despite everything they'd been through. "Actually, what if we all go to the cafe, but you keep the girls company at a separate table?" she suggested, feeling more comfortable with that arrangement. "That way they're still within my sight." "Perfect," Roget agreed with an easy smile. "They deserve some fun after everything they've been through." Alexandra nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and amazement at how quickly her daughters had come to trust this man who had been instrumental in their rescue. Their resilience was remarkable, especially given what they'd endured. This thought only strengthened her resolve to pursue justice against the men responsible. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything you've done." Roget waved away her thanks, continuing to arrange the supplies he'd brought. Anyone would have done the same. But Alexandra knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have noticed two small figures on a distant island. Not everyone would have investigated. Not everyone would continue to help a stranger and her traumatized children days after the rescue. As she watched him organizing groceries in her kitchen, Alexandra felt a small measure of the tension she'd been carrying ease from her shoulders. Despite the challenges ahead, at least she wasn't facing them alone. Alexandra was still chatting with Roget in the kitchen when the bedroom door creaked open. Casey and Chloe emerged, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their faces brightened visibly when they spotted Roget. "You're here again," Chloe said, her voice still thick with sleep but tinged with genuine pleasure. Alexandra watched the interaction with a mixture of emotions. She was surprised by how quickly her daughters had formed an attachment to Roget, especially after the trauma they'd experienced. Trust should have been a challenge for them, particularly with male figures, yet they gravitated toward him with an ease that was both heartwarming and slightly concerning. As a mother, part of her worried about this rapid bond, but she couldn't deny that Roget had earned it. He was, after all, partly responsible for their rescue. Children often recognize genuine kindness, and Roget had shown nothing but authentic care toward her family. The contrast between him and the men who had held her daughters captive couldn't be more stark. These thoughts strengthened Alexandra's determination to see justice done. Those men had exploited her daughter's innocence and trust, the same qualities that allowed them to connect with Roget so quickly. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her lawyer, leaving a voice note. "I'm on my way to the cafe," her friend said. "Should be there in less than 30 minutes. After the message ended, Alexandra turned to the girls. "We need to go out for a little while. Mum is meeting someone important at the cafe next door." Casey's expression fell slightly. "Is it going to be another long talk, Mum?" Alexandra crouched to their level, noting how their expressions had dimmed at the prospect of another adult conversation where they would be expected to sit quietly. "Yes, but Roget will keep you company so you won't get bored." The girls perked up immediately, exchanging quick glances. "Go change into daytime clothes," Alexandra told them, and they scampered off to their room. While they were getting ready, Alexandra typed a quick message to Ben, informing him they were leaving the apartment. He had instructed her to keep him updated on their movements as part of the victim protection protocol. When everyone was ready, they left the apartment together, taking the elevator to the ground floor. Alexandra felt a surprising sense of freedom as they stepped outside into the sunshine, despite the knowledge that they were still under police protection. The simple act of walking outside without fear felt like a small victory after the days of confinement. As they made their way toward the cafe, Alexandra noticed how Casey and Chloe maintained physical contact with her, each holding one of her hands tightly. Their experience had left them wary of open spaces, yet they walked with determination, their eyes darting around to take in their surroundings. Roget walked slightly behind them, his presence a reassuring buffer between the small family and the rest of the world. Alexandra caught herself feeling grateful once again for his steady support, and wondered how they would manage once they returned to Queensland, where such help might not be so readily available. For now, though, she was content to focus on the meeting ahead and the brief moment of normalcy this outing provided for her family. The cafe was just a short walk from the apartment, its storefront warm and inviting with potted plants flanking the entrance. Alexandra peered through the window, scanning the interior for her lawyer, but there was no sign of her yet. "She's not here yet," Alexandra announced, turning to suggest they wait inside. However, Casey and Chloe were no longer looking at the cafe. Their attention had been completely captured by the colourful arcade next door, its entrance lit with flashing lights and the muffled sounds of game music escaping each time someone opened the door. "Mum, can we go there?" Casey asked, pointing eagerly. Chloe's expression was equally hopeful as she tugged gently on Alexandra's hand. Both girls looked up at her with pleading eyes that reminded Alexandra of days before the kidnapping, of normal weekend outings and simple childhood joys. "We should go in the cafe and wait," Alexandra began, but the disappointment on her daughters' faces was immediate. Robert cleared his throat. "There's no point waiting idly in the cafe," he suggested. "We could all go to the arcade until your lawyer arrives." Alexandra hesitated, but found herself unable to resist the first genuine excitement she'd seen from her daughters since their rescue 3 days ago. "All right, just for a little while." The girls' faces lit up as they entered the arcade, their eyes widening at the array of colourful games, claw machines and blinking lights. The space was relatively empty at this time of day, with just a few teenagers gathered around a racing game in the corner. Chloe was immediately drawn to a row of claw machines filled with plush toys. "Look at the dolphin," she exclaimed, pressing her hands against the glass. Robert pulled out his wallet and showed Alexandra a plastic card. "I come here occasionally to unwind, still have some credits on my play card." His expression was almost as hopeful as the girls'. Would it be okay if they tried a few games? Alexandra found herself nodding, unable to deny this simple pleasure. As the girls huddled excitedly before the claw machine with Robert explaining how to maneuver the controls, Alexandra felt a powerful wave of nostalgia. The scene transported her back to Friday nights when David was still alive, when they would take the girls to the mall and watch them play similar games with the same expressions of concentration and delight. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime, before cancer took her husband, before strangers stole her children, before her world collapsed and slowly, painfully, began to rebuild itself. Her phone rang, pulling her from her reverie. It was Melissa again, calling to let her know she had arrived at the cafe. "I need to go," Alexandra told Robert, gesturing toward the girls who were deeply focused on guiding the metal claw toward a blue dolphin plush. "The lawyer's here." The girls looked up with matching expressions of disappointment. "But we almost got it," Casey protested, pointing at the dolphin that had slipped from the claw's grasp at the last moment. "We can try once more," Chloe pleaded. Alexandra glanced at her watch, feeling torn. Her meeting was important, but the pure joy on her daughters' faces was something she hadn't seen in so long. Robert seemed to sense her dilemma. "If you don't mind," he offered, "they could stay and play while you meet with your lawyer next door. I promise I'll keep them in sight the entire time." Alexandra's protective instincts flared, but she reminded herself that Robert had proven trustworthy, and the cafe was literally next door. "Once you get the toy, please bring them to me," she said finally. 15 minutes, no more, please." "Promise," Robert agreed, while the girls nodded enthusiastically, already turning back to the claw machine. With a final glance at her daughters, safely engaged and genuinely happy for the first time in days, Alexandra left the arcade and headed to the cafe, feeling both anxious about being separated from them and determined to move forward with the legal process that would ensure their future safety. Alexandra's gaze swept the room until it landed on her lawyer and longtime friend Melissa, seated at a corner table by the window. From her vantage point, Melissa had an unobstructed view of the arcade entrance, her posture composed yet alert. They embraced warmly before sitting down. Melissa had been Alexandra's friend since university, and had built a reputation as a tenacious advocate for families. Her presence was a comfort Alexandra hadn't realized how badly she needed. "Thank you for coming all this way," Alexandra said, her voice thick with emotion. Melissa reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "When you called, there was no question. Everyone in our community knows about your case. When the news broke that you'd found the girls, it was all anyone could talk about." The waitress brought them coffee as Alexandra began recounting everything, from the moment Roggett spotted the girls on the island to what Casey and Chloe had revealed to the social worker that morning. "They were taking pictures of them," Alexandra said quietly, her hands clenching around her coffee cup. "And there were other children. They'd threatened to withhold food if the children didn't cooperate." Melissa's professional composure slipped briefly, revealing her horror before she regained control. "And the police have identified these men?" "Mike Stanton and Billy Connor, associates of the ringleader Darren Corey, but Corey has supposedly fled to Sweden." Alexandra's eyes hardened. "I'm going to keep pressing charges until they're all behind bars with the maximum sentences possible." "I'm with you completely," Melissa assured her. "It won't be easy. Men with money and connections can drag legal proceedings out for years, but we'll fight every step of the way." They spent the next 20 minutes discussing strategy, how to handle the case when they returned to Queensland, which charges would be most likely to stick, and how to protect the girls from the trauma of a trial. "I need to use the restroom," Alexandra said eventually, standing up. "I'll be right back." The restroom was empty when she entered. As she washed her hands afterward, something caught her eye, an envelope propped against the mirror, her name written across it in red ink. Alexandra stared at it, water still running over her hands. With a sense of dread, she turned off the tap, dried her hands, and picked up the envelope. It felt light, containing only a single sheet of paper. She pulled it out, unfolded it, and felt her blood run cold. "The girls belong to us. Drop the legal case, or we are watching you." The message was written in the same red ink as her name on the envelope, the letters jagged and threatening. Alexandra's hands began to shake. How had anyone known she would be here? How had they placed this note specifically where she would find it? She raised her eyes to the mirror and froze. Behind her, in the far corner of the restroom, stood a figure in a black hoodie, face obscured by a mask. The person was completely still, watching her, a flip knife held casually in one gloved hand. Alexandra's instincts kicked in. She shoved the note into her purse and bolted for the door, bursting back into the cafe. "There's someone with a weapon in the restroom," she shouted, her voice carrying across the entire cafe. "They threatened me." The other patrons turned in alarm. Melissa was immediately at her side, while a staff member rushed toward the phone to call the police. 2 male employees cautiously approached the restroom door. "What happened?" Melissa demanded, her arm protectively around Alexandra's shoulders. "There was a note with my name on it," Alexandra explained breathlessly. "A threat. And when I looked up, someone was standing there watching me, holding a knife." One of the employees emerged from the restroom, escorting a confused-looking woman in casual clothes. "There's just this customer in there," he reported. "No one with a mask or weapon." The woman looked irritated. "I don't know what she's talking about. I was just using the facilities when she burst out screaming. Is this some kind of joke?" Alexandra stared at the woman in disbelief. "That's not... There was someone else in there, someone in a black hoodie and mask." The woman crossed her arms. "It was just me. This woman is clearly confused or trying to cause trouble." The cafe manager had arrived on the scene now. "The police are on their way," he announced. "Let's all stay calm until they get here." Alexandra felt dizzy, her heart racing. Had she imagined it? No, she couldn't have. The note was real. It was still in her purse, but where had the hooded figure gone? The police arrived within minutes, led by Ben himself. Alexandra felt a flood of relief at seeing a familiar, trusted face. "What happened?" Ben asked, his expression concerned as he approached Alexandra. She pulled the threatening note from her purse and handed it to him. "This was left for me in the restroom, and there was someone watching me at the corner, wearing a hoodie and mask, holding a knife." Ben examined the note with a grim expression, then signaled to his officers to search the restroom and the surrounding areas. "We searched the woman who was in there," one of the cafe employees explained. "She didn't have anything on her, no mask, no knife, nothing suspicious." The woman in question was speaking with another officer, gesturing animatedly, clearly upset at being associated with the incident. "I have to check on my daughters," Alexandra said suddenly, remembering with horror that Casey and Chloe were just next door. "They're at the arcade with Roger." Without waiting for a response, she rushed out of the cafe, leaving Ben and the other officers to continue their investigation. Her only thought was reaching her children, making sure they were safe from whoever had left that threatening message. Alexandra burst into the arcade, her heart pounding as her eyes frantically searched for her daughters. Relief washed over her when she spotted Casey and Chloe standing near a claw machine with Roger, their faces lit up with excitement. Chloe was clutching a blue dolphin plush toy, proudly holding it up for Roger to see. When Chloe noticed Alexandra approaching, she immediately held up the toy. "Look, Mom, we got it!" Alexandra rushed to them, checking them over instinctively before pulling them into a tight embrace. Roger's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Alexandra? What's wrong?" "Are you okay, Mommy?" Casey asked, picking up on her mother's distress. Alexandra took a deep breath, trying to control her panic. "I'm fine, sweethearts. Just missed you both." She looked up at Roger. "Someone left a threatening note for me in the cafe restroom, threatening to take the girls again." Roger's face darkened. "What, are you sure?" "I saw someone in there with a knife," Alexandra explained in a low voice, mindful of the girls who were now examining their new toy. "The police are there now, but I had to make sure the girls were safe." "I didn't let them out of my sight for a second," Roger assured her. "No one suspicious came near us." Alexandra nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Let's go back to the cafe," Roger suggested. "The police will want to talk to all of us." They returned to find Ben and several officers still interviewing witnesses. Alexandra's lawyer was deep in conversation with one of the detectives, likely recounting what Alexandra had told her before the incident. Ben approached as soon as he spotted them. "The woman from the restroom checks out," he reported. "She's a regular customer who came in with her husband. She's confused and a bit upset about being suspected, but she's cooperating fully." "Ben, I didn't imagine this," Alexandra insisted. "Someone was there, I saw them, and the note proves it." Ben glanced at the note in his hand. "I believe you about the note. This is definitely threatening and we're taking it seriously. But we've searched the entire premises and found no one matching the description you gave. No one saw anyone in a mask or hoodie enter or exit the restroom." "How is that possible?" Alexandra demanded, her frustration mounting. "We're reviewing the cafe's security footage right now," Ben assured her. "If someone was there, we'll find them." Melissa approached, having concluded her conversation with the detective. "Alexandra, I know you're upset, but we need to think about your safety now. This note is clear evidence that someone is watching you." Ben nodded in agreement. "I think it's best if you all return to the apartment and stay there. I'll coordinate with headquarters to either move you to a more secure location or expedite your return to Queensland." Alexandra looked down at her daughters, who were watching the adults with worried expressions, their earlier joy from the arcade completely forgotten. "All right," she agreed, "but I'm not backing down on the legal case. If anything, this makes me more determined." "Of course," Melissa said. "I'll be in touch soon to continue our discussion." As they prepared to leave, Roger offered to accompany them back to the apartment. Alexandra accepted without hesitation, grateful for the additional protection and support. The walk back felt much longer than the journey to the cafe had been. Alexandra kept the girls close, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of the hooded figure from the restroom. Ben had assigned an officer to escort them, but it did little to ease her anxiety. The threatening note had made one thing abundantly clear: they were not as safe as they'd thought. Someone was watching them, someone connected to the men who had taken her daughters, someone willing to risk approaching her in a public place. The battle for justice had just become considerably more dangerous. Once inside the apartment, Alexandra double-checked every lock and examined each window, pulling the curtains closed against the afternoon sunlight. Roger methodically inspected the entire space, checking corners, vents, light fixtures, and the landline phone for any signs of surveillance devices or bugs. "I don't see anything suspicious," he reported finally, "but that doesn't mean we should let our guard down." Alexandra sat heavily at the dining table, trying to steady her nerves. Casey and Chloe stood close by, their new toy dolphin clutched tightly in Chloe's arms, their expressions reflecting the anxiety that had returned to the apartment with them. "Can Roget stay tonight?" Casey asked suddenly. "To protect us?" "I feel safer when he's here." Alexandra looked up, caught between her instinct to protect her daughters herself and the recognition that having another adult present, especially one with military training, would be reassuring. "We can't ask Roget to do that," she began gently. "Actually, I don't mind," Roget interjected. "The fact that someone knew your location and movements is concerning. The police are outside, but if it would make everyone feel more secure, I'm happy to stay on the sofa tonight." Alexandra considered the offer. Although Roget was still somewhat of a stranger, he had proven himself trustworthy repeatedly. And after the incident at the cafe, the thought of spending the night alone with only her daughters felt daunting. "If you're sure it's no trouble," she said finally, relief evident in her voice. "None at all," Roget assured her. The decision seemed to comfort the girls immediately. The tension in their small shoulders eased slightly, and they moved to sit on the sofa, speaking to each other in hushed tones about where their dolphin would sleep. Despite the sunshine still streaming through the cracks in the curtains, the day stretched before them long and intimidating. Being confined to the apartment again after their brief taste of freedom felt especially constraining now. After a period of uncomfortable silence, Roget spoke up. "We should set up some security measures for tonight." He gestured to the front door. "I have some equipment at my place, safety alarms, old devices. I could set them up here if you'd like." "Would that help?" Alexandra asked. Roget nodded. "I used these devices during my military service. They'll alert us if anyone tries to enter the apartment, even if they manage to pick the locks." Alexandra considered this. "How long would it take you to get them?" "My place isn't far, maybe 15 minutes each way, half an hour total." After some hesitation, Alexandra agreed. The additional security measures would provide some peace of mind, and the police presence outside the building offered protection while Roget was gone. "Be careful," she told him as he prepared to leave. "Whoever left that note might be watching the building." "I'll be vigilant," Roget promised. "Don't open the door for anyone except the police or your lawyer while I'm gone." After Roget left, Alexandra double-checked the locks and then sat with her daughters, trying to distract them from the situation. She found a children's book on the small shelf in the living room and began reading to them, doing her best to make the characters' voices entertaining despite her lingering anxiety. The girls gradually relaxed, leaning against her as she read. These small moments of normalcy felt precious, fragile threads of their previous life that Alexandra was desperately trying to weave back together. True to his word, Roget returned within 30 minutes carrying a box of equipment. The girls watched with fascination as he set up small devices near the doors and windows, explaining in simple terms how they worked. "This one makes a sound if the door opens," he told them, demonstrating with a small magnetic sensor. "And this one can tell if someone is walking near the door from the outside." The process of setting up the security measures helped pass the time, and the visible preparations seemed to reassure everyone in the apartment. By late afternoon, Roget had completed the installation and tested everything to ensure it was working properly. The remainder of the day passed slowly. They had dinner together, read more stories, and watched a children's program on television. As evening approached, Alexandra's anxiety about the night ahead began to grow despite the security measures in place. When bedtime arrived, the girls were reluctant to go to their room alone. "Let's keep all the doors open tonight," Roget suggested. "That way we can hear each other if anything happens." The compromise seemed to satisfy the girls, who finally settled into their beds. Robert positioned himself on the sofa in the living room, while Alexandra retreated to her bedroom, leaving both doors wide open as agreed. As she lay in bed, Alexandra found sleep elusive. Every noise from outside made her tense. Car doors closing, voices passing by, the occasional siren in the distance. She kept replaying the incident at the cafe, trying to understand how someone could have placed that note specifically for her to find, and then vanished without a trace. The thought that they were being watched, that someone had followed them from the apartment to the cafe, was terrifying. Even more frightening was the implication that these people still believed they had some claim to her daughters. "The girls belong to us," the note had said. Alexandra turned onto her side, staring at the window where a thin sliver of moonlight penetrated the edge of the curtain. This day, which had started with hope for normalcy, had devolved into a reminder that their ordeal wasn't truly over. The men who had taken her daughters might be in custody, but their network was clearly still active and threatening. The night seemed to stretch endlessly before her, filled with shadows and whispered fears. Eventually, exhaustion began to overcome anxiety, and Alexandra felt herself drifting toward uneasy sleep, comforted slightly by the knowledge that Robert was on guard in the living room and that her daughters were safely back under her protection, where they belonged. Hours later, Alexandra was startled awake by a sound she couldn't immediately identify. The apartment was dark and quiet now, the only light coming from the digital clock on the bedside table showing just after midnight. She listened intently, wondering if she had dreamed the noise. Unable to settle, she rose from the bed and moved quietly to check on the girls. Casey and Chloe were still fast asleep, Casey's arm protectively draped over her sister, their breathing deep and regular. Reassured, Alexandra stepped into the hallway. In the dimly lit living room, she could make out Robert's form on the sofa. His breathing seemed steady, suggesting he was asleep. Alexandra made her way to the kitchen, needing water to soothe her dry throat. As she reached for a glass, her eye caught something on the dining table, a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, presumably belonging to Robert. The sight triggered a memory. She hadn't smoked since before her first pregnancy, having quit when she and her husband David decided to start a family. But now, with nerves frayed and sleep elusive, the cigarettes seemed to offer a momentary escape from the constant tension. Alexandra filled her glass with warm water from the dispenser and took a slow sip, willing herself to ignore the cigarettes. But as she turned to make her way back to her room, the temptation gripped her with an unrelenting force. The unease gnawed at her, a deep-seated terror whispering that danger was still lurking, unseen yet present. The unsettling notion that someone might be watching her, even at this late hour, wrapped around her like a tightening net, making it impossible to shake the urge that clawed at her resolve. With slightly trembling hands, she picked up the pack and the lighter. Smoking in the bathroom would leave a lingering smell that might raise questions from the girls in the morning. After a moment's consideration, she decided to step just outside the apartment door for a quick cigarette, needing the momentary relief more than she cared to admit. She carefully deactivated the alarm Robert had programmed on the front door, following the exact method he had shown her earlier. Every movement was deliberate, her fingers steady yet cautious, ensuring not a single sound betrayed her actions. Holding her breath, she eased the door open, inch by inch, the faintest creak setting her nerves on edge. Slipping into the dimly lit hallway, she paused for a heartbeat, listening intently to the silence that stretched before her, before stepping forward into the unknown. The first drag of the cigarette was harsh after so many years, but the second was smoother, bringing a familiar light-headedness that helped distance her from the day's stress. Alexandra leaned against the wall beside her door, gazing down the empty hallway as her thoughts drifted. She thought about the long legal battle ahead, wondering how she would balance that with helping her daughters heal from their trauma. She thought about returning to Queensland, to the home filled with memories of David, where they would have to rebuild their lives without him. She thought about the beach where they had scattered his ashes, the same beach where their lives had been shattered when the girls disappeared. Was it all connected somehow? The loss of David, then the kidnapping of the girls. It seemed too cruel to be mere coincidence, yet she knew that thinking this way led nowhere productive. Bad things happened, sometimes in terrible succession, without supernatural explanation. The cigarette had burned down to its final embers, and Alexandra suddenly became aware of how far her thoughts had spiraled into the depths of her own fears and anxieties. With a quiet sigh, she shook her head, forcing herself to break free from the oppressive weight of her mind's wandering. She stubbed out the cigarette in a small trash bin in the corridor near her apartment door, watching the last tendrils of smoke curl upward before dissipating. Steeling herself, she turned back toward her apartment, her steps slow but determined, as if trying to leave the darkness of her thoughts behind with each stride. That was when a gloved hand suddenly clamped over her mouth from behind. Another arm wrapped around her body, pulling her away from her door with surprising strength. Alexandra's instincts kicked in immediately as she struggled against her assailant. "This is for filing the legal case," a harsh voice whispered in her ear. "A warning." Alexandra fought harder, twisting her body and trying to break free. Finding a momentary opportunity when the grip on her mouth loosened slightly, she bit down hard on the gloved hand. Her attacker recoiled with a hiss of pain, and Alexandra seized the chance to scream as loudly as she could, hoping to alert Roggett or the police officers who were supposed to be stationed outside the building. The kidnapper recovered quickly, lunging forward to silence her again, but before he could reach her, the apartment door flew open. Roggett burst out, immediately assessing the situation and launching himself at the attacker. The two men collided with enough force to send them both staggering. Alexandra backed away, watching as Roggett, drawing on his military training, grappled with the masked figure. In the struggle, Roggett managed to pull off the mask, revealing the face of a man Alexandra recognized with shock, the husband of the woman from the cafe restroom this morning. The man took advantage of Roggett's momentary surprise to wrench himself free. He turned to flee, but Roggett lunged forward, grabbing the back of his jacket. For a second, it seemed Roggett had him, but then the fabric slipped from his grasp and the man disappeared down the stairwell at the end of the hallway. "Are you hurt?" Roggett asked Alexandra, his breathing heavy from the confrontation. "No, I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice was shaking. That was the husband of the woman at the cafe, the one who claimed she didn't know anything about the note. Alexandra swiftly pulled out her phone and dialed Officer Ben, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. She relayed every detail of what had just happened, her free hand tightening into a fist as she spoke. While she remained on the line, they made their way back into the apartment, securing the door once more with extra care. Alexandra moved quickly to check on the girls, her heart easing slightly as she found them still deep in sleep, undisturbed by the chaos that had unfolded. With a quiet exhale, she gently closed the door, leaving only a slight gap, just enough to hear them if they stirred. When she rejoined Roggett in the living room, she asked in a hushed voice, "Why did you let him go? You had him by the jacket." A small smile crossed Roggett's face. "I did it intentionally. I planted a tracking device on him when I grabbed his jacket." "A tracking device?" Alexandra repeated, confused. Roggett gestured to the box of equipment he'd brought earlier. "In my military years, I carried small tracking devices for emergency situations. I slipped one into his pocket during the struggle." He pulled out a small electronic device from the box and switched it on. A blinking red dot appeared on the screen. "Now we can see exactly where he goes. So we can find out who's behind this," Alexandra realized, hope rising in her voice. "If he reports back to whoever sent him—" "Exactly," Roggett confirmed. "These people have been watching you, tracking your movements. Now we're tracking them." Alexandra stared at the small blinking dot on the screen, representing the man who had just tried to kidnap her. How did he know I would come outside? Was he waiting there the whole time? He must have been watching the apartment, waiting for the right moment, Roggett reasoned, his voice tense with certainty. After this morning's incident at the cafe, they must have planned their next move, calculated every detail. He exhaled sharply, his gaze dark with concern. When you stepped out alone, he saw his chance. The realization that they had been under such close surveillance sent a cold shiver down Alexandra's spine. She shuddered, her pulse still unsteady, Yet she couldn't ignore the relief washing over her. Her impulsive decision to step outside for a cigarette hadn't ended in disaster, all because of Rogert's swift reaction. But even as she tried to steady herself, a new thought gnawed at her. Where were the police officers who were supposed to be standing guard by the apartment? If they had been even half as vigilant as the stalker, perhaps the situation wouldn't have escalated this far. "The tracking dot is stopping," Rogert observed, pointing to the screen where the blinking light had ceased moving. "He's reached his destination." The blinking red dot on Rogert's tracking device had settled at a fixed location, indicating that Alexandra's attacker had reached his destination. Alexandra leaned closer to the small screen, trying to make sense of the location. "Is that an address we can find?" she asked. "Yes, it's about 15 to 20 minutes from here," Rogert confirmed, studying the screen intently. "Near the industrial area on the outskirts of town." Before they could discuss their next move, they heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the apartment building. Moments later, there was a firm knock at the door. Alexandra checked the peephole and saw Ben standing in the hallway with several officers. She quickly opened the door to let them in. "Are you all right?" Ben asked immediately, his gaze sweeping over Alexandra to check for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Rogert intervened before he could hurt me." Ben turned to Rogert. "Tell me exactly what happened." As Rogert recounted the confrontation, including his decision to plant the tracking device on the attacker, Ben's expression shifted from concern to cautious optimism. "That was quick thinking, well done," he acknowledged, examining the tracking device that now showed the stationary dot. "This could lead us directly to whoever's behind these threats." Ben pulled out his radio and called for backup, sharing the location indicated by the tracking device. "I'm going there now with a team," he told Alexandra. "I'll leave 2 officers here with you for protection." "The man who attacked me was the husband of the woman at the cafe," Alexandra reminded him. She claimed she didn't know anything about the threat, but they must be working together. "We'll find out soon enough," Ben said grimly. "Stay here, keep the doors locked, and don't leave for any reason. I'll radio in as soon as we know something." After Ben left with most of his team, the apartment felt eerily quiet despite the presence of the 2 remaining officers who positioned themselves in the living room. Neither Alexandra nor Rogert felt inclined to sleep now, the adrenaline from the attack still coursing through their systems. "Do you think they'll find something at that address?" Alexandra asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the girls or being overheard by the officers. "Hard to say," Rogert admitted, "but people make mistakes when they're panicked, and that man was definitely panicked when he fled. If he went straight to whoever sent him, this could be the break we've been waiting for." Alexandra nodded, daring to hope that this frightening incident might actually lead to something positive. "The detectives told me this morning that Darren Corey had fled to Sweden. What if that was misinformation? What if he's still here in Australia, directing all of this?" "It's possible," Rogert agreed. "Creating false travel documentation would be simple for someone with his resources." They fell into tense silence, watching the tracking device where the red dot remained stationary. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited for news from Ben. Finally, the radio carried by one of the officers crackled to life. Both Alexandra and Rogert immediately turned their attention to it. "You won't believe what big fish we caught," came the excited voice through the static. "We've secured the attacker and his wife, plus 3 more men from the house, and one of them is Darren Corey himself." Alexandra and Rogert exchanged shocked glances, and even the officers looked surprised by this development. "Darren Corey," Alexandra repeated, disbelief and hope warring in her voice. "Are they sure?" The officer with the radio listened as more details came through. "They've confirmed his identity," he reported. "All suspects are now in custody and being transported to the station." Alexandra sat back, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. "The detectives told me Corey had fled to Sweden. There were travel documents." "Probably false documentation to throw off the investigation," Rogert suggested. "He might have been hiding here the whole time, continuing to direct his operation from the shadows." As they discussed the implications of this development, a small voice interrupted them. "Mom!" "What's happening? Why are there police here?" Alexandra turned to see Casey and Chloe standing in the hallway, rubbing sleep from their eyes and looking confused by the scene in their living room. "Everything is okay now, sweethearts," Alexandra assured them, opening her arms as they approached. "The police caught some bad men who were trying to scare us." "Did they catch all the bad men?" Chloe asked seriously, her small face pinched with worry. "I think they might have," Alexandra told her, hugging both girls close. "The police are very good at their job." The officer's radio crackled again with a command for them to return to the station. Alexandra immediately stood up, still holding her daughter's hands. "We need to go to the station," she told the officers. "I want to know exactly what's happening, and I don't want to wait until morning for updates." The officers exchanged glances. "We were instructed to keep you here, ma'am," one of them said hesitantly. "I understand, but I won't be able to rest until I know more details," Alexandra insisted. "Please, call Officer Hansen and ask if we can come to the station." After a brief radio conversation with Ben, who granted permission, the officers agreed to escort them. Roggett offered to follow in his own car, and within minutes they were heading toward the police station, the girls fully awake now and full of questions that Alexandra did her best to answer in age-appropriate ways. As they drove through the quiet streets of Broome, Alexandra felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. After 8 months of searching for her daughters, followed by days of threats and uncertainty, they might finally be on the brink of resolving this nightmare completely. If Darren Corey was truly in custody, if the mastermind behind the trafficking operation had been captured, then perhaps they could finally begin to heal without looking over their shoulders, without jumping at shadows or questioning every stranger who approached them. Alexandra squeezed her daughter's hands as the police station came into view, its lights blazing against the night sky. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, as a family finally made whole again. The police station was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Officers moved purposefully through the halls, their usual calm demeanor replaced with an energetic urgency that spoke volumes about the significance of the night's arrests. Alexandra and her daughters were escorted to a waiting room, while Roggett was taken to provide his statement about the attack. The girls, though wide awake now, were quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation, despite Alexandra's efforts to shield them from the details. "When can we go home?" Casey asked, leaning against Alexandra's side. "Soon, sweetheart," Alexandra promised, though she wasn't entirely sure what home would look like after everything they'd been through. Would they ever feel secure in their Queensland house again? Would the girls be able to sleep without nightmares or play on a beach without fear? Before she could dwell further on these questions, Maisie Colton, the social worker from that morning, arrived at the waiting room. The girls immediately recognized her and seemed relieved to see a familiar face. "I heard what happened," Maisie said to Alexandra, while the girls greeted her. "Would it be all right if I took them for some hot chocolate in the break room? Give you a chance to speak with the officers privately." Alexandra hesitated, but recognized the wisdom in this suggestion. The girls didn't need to hear the details of Corey's arrest or the evidence against him. "That would be good, thank you," she agreed. After the girls left with Maisie, an officer escorted Alexandra to a different room where Ben was waiting with 2 other detectives. Their expressions were a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We've confirmed it's definitely Darren Corey," Ben announced without preamble. "We found him in a hidden room at the residence. The man who attacked you, Mr. Milton, broke down as soon as we arrived and led us straight to him." "I don't understand," Alexandra said, taking a seat at the table. "Why would Corey still be in Australia when he could have fled to Sweden or anywhere else in the world?" "Control," one of the detectives explained. "Corey wasn't willing to trust his operation to subordinates. He preferred to remain close, directing everything personally from what he thought was a secure location. We also found evidence that the travel documentation to Sweden was created specifically to mislead law enforcement," Ben added. "He never intended to leave." "What about Milton and his wife?" Alexandra asked. "The couple from the cafe?" Ben's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he spoke. They've both given their initial statements. According to them, Corey was holding their daughter, one of the children caught in his trafficking operation. He used her as leverage, promising to return her and erase a significant debt they owed him if they helped intimidate you into dropping the case. He exhaled sharply, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and skepticism. But of course, we still need to verify their claims before taking anything at face value. Alexandra felt a wave of conflicted emotions, sympathy for parents desperate enough to threaten others to save their child, and anger that they had chosen to aid Corey rather than seek help from authorities. But the most important development, Ben continued, his voice dropping slightly, is what we found in Corey's hidden room. He slid a folder across the table. Alexandra opened it to find photographs of documents, computer screens, and physical evidence. We found extensive records of his entire operation, Ben explained as Alexandra examined the contents. Bank transactions, client lists, locations where children were held, photographic evidence of the exploitation, and documentation of where children were sent. Alexandra's hand trembled as she turned the pages, catching glimpses of photographs that confirmed the horror the girls had described that morning. So you have enough evidence to convict him? And the others involved? More than enough, Ben confirmed. Corey wasn't just careless, he was arrogant. He kept detailed records, probably because he never believed anyone would find his hiding place. Between the physical evidence and witness testimonies, we've got an airtight case. Alexandra closed the folder, unable to look at more of the disturbing contents. What happens now? The formal charges will be filed tomorrow morning. Corey, Stanton, Connor, and several others connected to the operation will stay in custody while the case moves forward. Ben's voice grew a bit softer. As for you and the girls, we'll arrange for your swift return to Queensland. You'll be safer there, away from any remaining associates of Corey in this area and their influence over the local police. Part of our team is also investigating the corruption. We suspect the attack may have happened because the police allowed it, and we're looking into the officer who was supposed to guard your apartment during that shift. Alexandra nodded, a sense of relief washing over her at the thought of returning home, of putting space between her family and this place that had come to symbolize both a miraculous reunion and an ongoing threat. There's one more thing, Ben added. Based on the information we found in Corey's files, we've dispatched teams to a property outside town where other children are being held. Alexandra's heart leapt. The house with the elephant-shaped tree, the one Casey and Chloe described. Ben nodded. The exact one. We found photographs of it in Corey's files. The rescue operation is underway as we speak. This news felt like the final piece falling into place. Not only had her own daughters been rescued, but other children would be saved as well. Children who might have otherwise disappeared into Corey's trafficking network, never to be seen by their families again. Thank you, Alexandra said quietly, for everything you've done. Ben dismissed her thanks with a slight shake of his head. I was just doing my job. You're the one who never gave up, even when the odds were impossibly against you. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Roggett entered, having completed his statement. They told me I'd find you here, he said to Alexandra. How are you holding up? Better now, she admitted. Knowing Corey is in custody changes everything. Roggett turned to Ben. I've been wondering something. How did you actually locate Corey in the house? Someone like him wouldn't be careless. Why hide locally instead of going abroad as he'd planned? Arrogance, Ben replied simply. He created the illusion of leaving the country, but stayed to maintain direct control over his operation. As for finding him, we have Miss Milton to thank for that. When he saw police surrounding the house, he immediately led us to the hidden room where Corey was hiding. And you found evidence there? Roggett asked. Substantial evidence, Ben confirmed. Enough to ensure Corey and his associates won't escape justice this time. As the conversation continued, Alexandra found her thoughts drifting to her daughters. Despite the relief of knowing Corey was in custody, she knew the road to recovery would be long and difficult. The physical reunion had been the first step, but healing the psychological wounds would take time, patience, and professional help. Yet for the first time since finding her daughters, Alexandra felt genuinely hopeful about their future. With Corey's arrest and the dismantling of his trafficking network, a significant threat had been removed from their lives. They could begin to rebuild without constantly looking over their shoulders, without fearing that shadows might contain enemies waiting to snatch away their fragile happiness. She looked up to find both Ben and Roget watching her with understanding expressions. These two men, one a dedicated officer who had never stopped searching, and one a pilot whose chance observation had changed everything, had become unexpected allies in her battle to reclaim her family. "I should check on the girls," Alexandra said, rising from her chair. "They must be wondering what's happening." As she left the room to find her daughters, Alexandra felt a lightness that had been absent for too long. The nightmare wasn't completely over. There would be trials, testimonies, and difficult conversations ahead, but the worst was behind them. Now, finally, they could begin to look forward, rather than constantly peering backward in fear. Alexandra and the girls, accompanied by Roget, followed the police officer down the corridor of the station toward the room where Maisie had taken them. Despite the late hour, the station remained busy, with officers moving purposefully between rooms, processing the night's significant arrests. As they approached the break room, Alexandra could hear her daughters' voices, lighter and more animated than they had been in days. The sound brought tears to her eyes, a reminder of who her girls had been before their ordeal, and who they might become again with time and healing. Inside the room, Casey and Chloe sat at a table with Maisie, empty hot chocolate mugs before them. When they spotted Alexandra, their faces lit up. "Mom, the police got all the bad men," Casey announced excitedly. Alexandra smiled at her daughter's simplified understanding of the situation. "That's right, sweetheart. Officer Hanson just told me all about it." Ben entered the room behind them, his expression tired but satisfied. "I wanted to give you a final update before you head back to the apartment for the night." The girls immediately focused their attention on him, having developed a trust for the officer who had been part of their rescue and subsequent protection. "We've confirmed that Darren Corey has been positively identified and is in custody," Ben told Alexandra, while keeping his language appropriate with the children present. "His associates have been arrested as well, and we've recovered substantial evidence from his hiding place." Casey tugged at Ben's sleeve. "What about our friends? The other kids in the house with the elephant tree?" Ben crouched down to the girl's level, his expression softening. "Yes, we found that house in the pictures. Police officers are there right now helping those children." The girls exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of relief and lingering concern. Alexandra recognized the bond that had formed between her daughters and the other captive children, a connection forged through shared trauma that would always be part of their story. "When can we go home?" Chloe asked, her small voice carrying the weight of exhaustion despite the late-night hot chocolate. "Very soon," Ben promised. "We're arranging for you to return to Queensland within the next few days, just as we discussed earlier." "And will we be safe there?" Casey asked, the innocent question revealing how deeply their sense of security had been shaken. Ben nodded solemnly. "Yes, these men won't be able to hurt you or any other children again." Alexandra placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, feeling the delicate bones beneath her fingers, a reminder of their vulnerability and her fierce determination to protect them. "And we'll have each other," she added. "That's the most important thing." The conversation was briefly interrupted when another officer entered to inform Ben that they needed his presence elsewhere. Before leaving, Ben assured them that transportation back to the apartment had been arranged and that officers would remain stationed outside their door throughout the night. As they prepared to leave, Casey looked up at Roget with serious eyes. "Will you come with us to the arcade again tomorrow? We still need to win that pink unicorn for Chloe." Roget smiled, crouching down to their level just as Ben had done. "I'd be honored. If your mum says it's okay, of course." Alexandra felt a surge of gratitude toward this man who had become such an unexpected but vital presence in their lives. "Of course it's okay. With Roget beside us, we can venture out more often now, and soon we'll be heading home." The return to the apartment was quiet, the events of the day having drained everyone of energy. The girls fell asleep almost immediately upon returning to their bed, their expressions peaceful, in a way Alexandra hadn't seen since before their abduction. Standing in the doorway of their room, watching their steady breathing, Alexandra felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Corrie had been captured, gratitude for the people who had helped them, and determination to ensure her daughters could heal from their trauma. Roggett appeared beside her, speaking softly to avoid waking the girls. "They're remarkably resilient." "They are," Alexandra agreed, "but there's still a long road ahead." "You won't be walking it alone," Roggett reminded her. "You have support, both here and back in Queensland." Alexandra nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. The past 8 months had taught her not only about the depths of her own strength, but also about the unexpected kindness of others. From Ben's steadfast commitment to the search, to Justin the fisherman's crucial information, to Roggett's timely intervention in multiple crises. "I should try to get some sleep," she said, suddenly aware of the exhaustion weighing on her. "Tomorrow will bring more statements, more preparations." "And a trip to the arcade," Roggett added with a small smile. "Life doesn't stop for legal proceedings." Alexandra returned his smile, grateful for the reminder that amidst the serious business of building a case against Corrie and his associates, there would also be moments of ordinary joy, like watching her daughters play arcade games or sharing a meal together without fear. As she settled into her bed that night, Alexandra reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the devastating moment on that Queensland beach, when she discovered her daughters missing, through months of fruitless searching, to the miracle of spotting them through binoculars off the coast of Western Australia, it had been a path marked by equal measures of despair and hope. Now, with Darren Corrie in custody and substantial evidence secured against him, she could finally allow herself to believe that justice would be served. The legal battle ahead would be challenging, especially for her daughters who might need to testify about their experiences. But Alexandra was prepared to fight with everything she had to ensure that Corrie and his associates received the maximum possible punishment for their crimes. More importantly, she was determined to help Casey and Chloe heal from their ordeal, to reclaim their childhood and rebuild their sense of security in the world. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but with professional support and boundless love, Alexandra believed they could move forward together.